Vote, and that we need to act in solidarity, support each other. We're hoping that a participatory budget process eventually is going to get us there, and it will benefit not only us, but it should benefit the city and Sam Adams, because it'll make it a lot easier for him to find under those rocks all that hidden money. So I would turn it over to Seamus at this point to tell us more about some of those kinds of innovative ideas.
Okay, folks, we're going to have a break in 10 minutes, so bear with me. So I'm going to talk about some kind of concrete solutions, alternatives to cuts-only budgets. These are suggestions, these are ideas, discussion starters. After the break, we'll come back and talk more about this. So we're not imposing these ideas on you. And hopefully we can come to some consensus, or a close consensus, on a common vision and how to push that into the community. So to start, what is a budget deficit? This is a dumb question, but actually it's very important to talk about this because no one else is. The politicians and media define this as an excess in services or excess in spending. In reality, it's the opposite. It's a shortfall in revenue. And this is kind of what Carrie talked about, having a story for us. This is kind of the beginning right now. We're trying to define a story that we can come to consensus on and work together about. So it's a shortfall in revenue, so therefore instead of cuts, we need more revenue. So how do we go about getting more revenue? Next slide. The criteria, I think you would agree, is that we don't want to tax working people because working people haven't taxed enough. We have high food, gas prices, rent prices. We have to go where the money is. And the money is, after decades of inequality, it's at the 1%. It's at the big corporations. So this kind of I think people would agree that we need progressive taxation to fill these voids and not taxes on working people or cuts in services. And this way of defining the problem gets us out of the cuts-only box we're stuck in. So some solutions for progressive taxation are on some of the issues that we've talked about. The PowerPoint isn't too important, so if you can't see it, it's all right. So instead of city cuts after every time there's a budget, we can look to other directions. One example is, I'm sorry, go back, that wasn't a point. One example is urban renewal, and we're going to hear more about that in a minute, but basically there's tens of millions of dollars trapped in these private funds that go towards luring developers to build, like the Pearl District, for example. We could use that money to fill the cuts in the services in our city. We could also, there's a business tax in Portland. We could raise a business tax on the big corporations and the big businesses, not the middle class businesses, but there's a lot of options if we talk about them. If we demand them as a strong coalition, we can achieve them. If we don't talk about them, we get their solutions, cuts only. Next slide. So we heard about education cuts. That's largely a statewide issue. That's where funding comes from. So we could demand, an idea is to demand another Measure 66 and 67, which in 2010 were very popular tax measures that taxed the 1%, the rich and the corporations. It saved hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts to services and education. But after that happened, Measure 66 expired, and no one's talking about it. Republicans and Democrats are united in not taxing the rich and corporations. So therefore, as a community, we have to come together and demand it happen. We can get it on the ballot again and have voters approve it if we work together towards a common goal. So this is a more broad problem, but a lack of democracy in the budget process. The city's budget had two community events, small events, which really a fraction of the city was represented. Both events were limited to a cuts-only discussion from the very beginning. Mayor Adams said, okay, we have to make cuts, there's no money, and that's that, and let's talk about how to make cuts. Zero talk about alternatives. It's shocking that this common sense approach is not used anywhere. So therefore, it's up to us to talk about common sense, educate the public about these alternatives, go back to our groups, have these discussions, and spread the word and mobilize around it. Next slide. So if we mobilize and stop the cuts, a long-term vision to inspire is in Brazil. In particular, Porto Alegre is a famous city because it's kind of the most impressive vision of participatory democracy. Participatory democracy is basically when the broader public is engaged in the budget process. at every level. And so in Porto Alegre, tens of thousands of people meet in mass meetings. They go over every step of the budget process. It's democratic, and they have the power legally and financially to implement their decisions. So they come together like we are today and talk about priorities, what they want, and after they agree on their priorities, they go and achieve it. And the government did not give them this power. They fought for years and organized for years. And now all over Latin America, all over Brazil, this process is happening. Even on a small scale in the US, in New York and Chicago, they have big neighborhoods that do this also. And that is the outcome of the community coming together, becoming involved, demanding to be heard, and organizing to make it happen as a group. It's good that we have different groups today doing their own thing, but really our power is in collective action. So if we come together and get our priorities straight, come together on a local level, state, national level. The problem is all over the country. It's the same problem. It's a revenue problem when it comes to cities, public sector cuts. And I'll leave it at that. We'll go to break now, and we come back. We'll talk more about this in our groups. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to start in 1 minute. Okay, our community presenters presented their interests, which are all of our interests, and their priorities, which are all of our priorities. So, and Seamus followed that with some ideas, and particularly about revenue from other places that have been successful. So what we want to do next is, if you'll see in worksheet number 2, a structured way to kind of drill down into this and hear your ideas and kind of summarize what we think are priorities, because we're hoping to come out of this with, as you said in the beginning of what you wanted, was some agreement on priorities, agreement on how we stick together about it, and what we're going to do, beginning strategies for finding revenue. So, again, I'll just go through this quickly because you already know how to do it. Individual reflection, very quickly, what did I hear, what unites us, table group discussion, what needs to be a priority in participatory budgeting, what ideas do we hear, what other ideas do we have, and then capture that on chart paper, and we'll do a report out, and we also want you to, you'll see on the walls that there's a spot on the wall that coincides with your table group number. And so when you're ready to record what you have discussed together, please go over to the wall and record it there. There's a lot of pages there. Maybe you won't have that much to say, but if you do, there it is for you. Because we have a line on the left side that shows about 3 inches, and we do something at the end, which I'll explain more thoroughly later, but we call it a walk-in vote, where you're able to put a check mark by anything that really resonates with you. And when we use this, when we transcribe everything and create a meeting summary to get kind of the pulse of what kind of thinking did we do here. So that's one of the things that we do that kind of helps things coalesce. So I'm going to be quiet now and let you go into your worksheets. Okay, we have another presentation coming that is going to be really helpful in knowing where all those rocks are that Sam Adams was talking about, that we can look under and help Sam Adams look under and build on the ideas that you're sharing now. So I'll come back and we'll have plenty of time for that conversation and for you to be able to ask questions and share your ideas, and they'll ask you some questions too. Okay, so which table would like to go first? Which table is all seated and would like to go first? We'll go first. Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
It's way too
we said cuts on the state level to prisons and reinvest in education, healthcare, transportation, housing, city services, and social services by getting rid of the mandatory minimum and less jail time for nonviolent crimes. Allocate urban renewal and PDC funds to the people who need it for housing. Stop over-policing, legalize marijuana, and tax it. work toward raising taxes a lot on the wealthy on the city, state, and federal level, make banks pay taxes and HOA fees on foreclosed properties, and a city works program with living wage jobs paid for by taxing rich corporations.
What community and human needs priorities have we heard so far? And what needs we heard were education, because we have human rights, but if we don't know our rights, then we are not going to be able to get what we need. So we need to increase the education for the people that live in the city so that they'll know what access and what benefits are supposed to be available to them. We also need to get more access to information regarding transportation and what we can do as individuals in order to make sure that we can continue to have access, not only with TriMet, but also with walkability and different things of that sort. How can we compromise with our city using Metro to make sure that we have safe walking areas as far as that goes as well? Another need is housing. We know that we have a huge homeless issue out here, and recently there's an article that came out that discussed the violence that's happening to the people that are homeless, and a lot of them are being killed. We're looking at 47, I believe, this year already. And so we need to find out how we can be a part of the solution. I think a lot of that lies in our public safety plans, but if we're not involved in that, then again, we're not going to be able to keep people safe that are homeless here in our city. And just an FYI, 1/3 of America's homeless are veterans and their families. So our heroes are coming back home and they're not safe here. And we would think that they would be unsafe in other places protecting our rights. Infrastructure, parks, streets, and waste and utilities. We need more information on how we can have access to those things. I was in a meeting with Juvenile Justice one time, and they were talking about the amount of money that they're spending on the criminal justice system to house youth. And one of the people sitting at the table said that a direct effect of people, 70% of the youth that were incarcerated happened when they cut the funds for the children to be able to participate in park-related activities. So a 70% jump went into our justice system and came from us just cutting the cost of, providing free access to children in parks and recreation. So we need to, as a city, come together and figure out how we can define the opportunity and bring that back. Because again, when we talk about reducing the criminal system and the cost that goes there, we have activities for kids. They won't become criminals. For the second part, what ideas did we hear about how these priorities can be paid for, both from Shamus and from city community presenters? Access to decision-making, transparency. Again, decision-making regarding policy and budgeting, that's one of the ways that we can have access to the funds that are needed for some of these things that we've discussed. If we understand what they're going to spend money on, we can also ask them what's the benefit, the direct benefit for our livability. And then if they can't explain that out to us, then we can redirect those funds into some of these things that we're asking for that we need as a human right. Civic education, information about how things work. Again, knowledge, access to education, understanding the process, being able to voice our concerns and ask for our direct benefits. If they can't give us the benefits, again, we shut them down. We don't have to accept anything that they give us, where we the people are the ones that govern. Turning concerns into action, being proactive and coming to them with proposals. As citizens, we can work together in groups. We can look at our outcomes of what we would want, and we can define ourselves with a proposal to act on that action front. We can go to them and say, this is what we're looking for. One of this group of speakers earlier came up there and they said when they provided the proposal for transportation, the TriMet, that the people looked at it and said, oh wow, this is great. It probably saved them millions of dollars, and over the long term it's going to benefit the citizens of Portland. So we have to be more proposal minded as opposed to action with just our fists in the air. We have to put it in writing. People are scared of that sometimes, especially when it makes sense. What ideas did we hear about these priorities and how they can be paid for? Oh, I'm sorry. So one of the things we said was raid the PDC funds. I look at a raid as an audit. Right now they are being audited for about $70 million. They have 4 vendors that they had preferred relationships with. That money is supposed to be available to the general public. All of us are supposed to have free enterprise when it comes to those type of dollars. But if the city sees fit to partner with the PDC and identify who they think is supposed to have that access, we can shut that down. All we have to do is be present. So when we say raid the funds, audit that system and be there in person and make sure that the people that they relate those opportunities with, those contractors, those developers, that they have a relationship with us. And that part of their plan of spending our money includes our benefits. The money comes from blighted opportunities, poverty. If the money is not spent to resolve those problems, then it's basically criminal neglect with a political agenda, and we have to stop that. Renewing the state level tax. Now, Charles said he likes paying taxes, but his way of saying that is basically he doesn't mind paying the tax if it's going to benefit us. But again, from an economic standpoint, we need to understand why those taxes are coming in, how exactly they're going to benefit us, and what's the outcome. Not just giving us another tax to pay, but what exactly is this tax paying for in the end? We need to be aware of those things in order to make our decisions. And D, dispensing tax structure more appropriately. And Jeff wrote this, so I'm not kind of understanding it, but when I was suggesting it, dispersing. One of the things we talked about at the table where we were saying that in underlying and outer research areas that their taxes are less than in the city of Portland. And so what we were talking about was the usual and customary amount of money that should be paid based on the tax fee structure. So let's say in Beaverton, if they're paying 20% and we're paying 70%, if we look at all the cities throughout the state and we say that we want to be average based on the usual and customary, that'll bring down our tax burden based on the basic fairness of it. And so I think that when we say dispersing tax structure, that we need to look at a usual and customary way of paying the taxes. I don't think that one city that's not getting the benefit over the long term should be paying more just for living here, and especially with our homeless problem. If our taxes were going to house those people, it would make a lot more sense.
Thank you. Okay, who's next? Who's next?
So, our priorities are everything everybody's been saying so far, which is good. But we also were thinking about more connected programs, as in education versus imprisonment, because education.
Closer to your mouth.
Oh, okay. So what people have been saying so far, those are part of our priorities as well. But we also included preventive programs, possibly skill-based training, or education versus imprisonment, because in Oregon there's Measure 11, which imprisons for people who are over the age of 15 for mandatory minimum sentencing, but we were thinking maybe programs like Second Look, which would enable them to have gone through half of their prison terms and then be considered for parole or other programs that would get them out of jail and doing more productive work for the community. And also education, funding our schools, which would be a huge preventive tactic to getting kids out of jails and out of gangs and violence in general. Yeah, and basically redirecting all of the funds that we have to human needs like education, shelter, water, food safety, and yeah.
All right, for table 7. For the priorities, we have education, housing, caring for the most vulnerable of us, transportation, and well-paid jobs. Under ways to pay, and we moved that up to include solutions. Make the rich pay. Defund the judicial branch of Portland. Call for the 6-hour workday. Get more workers working, more taxes paid, more productivity, more people able to buy goods locally. Open empty buildings and houses for use. All kind of climate jobs, including retrofitting buildings and rebuilding the transportation system.
Okay, here at table 12, our priorities were pretty much focused on, the fundamentals need funding. Our priorities were transparent and democratic budgeting. I really like what they're doing in Brazil, discuss, vote, and achieve. Changing the terms of debate, media, getting more sides, not just the one. no sources and fairness in generating revenue, forging broad alliances committed to equity, inclusion, and equalized public school funding regardless of the wealth of the neighborhood.
People were saying about being proactive and coming up with solutions. We wanted to just put out a few ideas for new revenue streams. Certainly, that's the new way. Speaking of framing, I guess you're not supposed to talk about taxes, but revenue measures. So we're talking about new revenue measures. One thing that people mentioned, I forget who said something about like almost like a citizens review board or some kind of collaborative governance model where we can actually have citizens be taking part in brainstorming, working with the government to figure out new funding revenue streams. So some ideas we talked about was a carbon tax to help fund public transportation. Some kind of, we weren't sure, but some kind of real estate tax. It could be like a real estate transfer tax. Or some taxes, I've heard some cities tax banks for vacant foreclosures, just to kind of tax them. I don't know exactly how it works, but just to encourage them to not keep their houses vacant. Taxes on the highest incomes and the parking lot taxes. And we're playing with the ideas of maybe tolls for bridges, but we're not sure. And then lastly, policies like inclusionary zoning that can help with requiring developers to set aside affordable housing.
So yeah, our priorities were similar to everyone else. I mean, we all need the basic needs met. As far as funding ideas, I had a few ideas that I'm surprised haven't come up yet. Measure 5 and Measure 50 reform, obviously. If we're not generating revenue, then we don't have it. So there's legislative fixes to those that have been put forward before. Seeking those out, getting our coalitions to support them are obviously a good one. Another one is the local tax revenue. There was a bill that was introduced that didn't make it out of committee last year that would allow like Multnomah County or the city of Portland to be able to tax themselves to create revenue. Currently it's illegal to do that. So yeah, finding that bill, getting it passed, again, another reform answer. As far as a couple of these other ones that I heard I'm going to kind of rip off of Table 12 real quick. So yeah, carbon tax is really good. We need to do it kind of in a regional way and make sure that it's a cap and dividend style. Carbon tax, there's a good bill that was written, that was introduced earlier this year, and I don't have the name of it or the person who sponsored it off the top of my head, but it's kind of like a cap and dividend, but it's being called a carbon tax, and it works really well. It's in a cap and dividend, they tax the people who pay for the carbon, and then they equalize the amount in return, and they pass it on to the people who live there. So it's almost like a subsidy for living in a certain region, and then you have the ability to use those dollars to either pay for the gas or whatever you need to be able to buy your goods, or take that money, use it for food, use it for things that would incur the extra cost anyway. And then the real estate transfer tax, that one I didn't want to rip off of, but the what is it? Obviously, we want to restructure the 1%. I mean, back before I was born, back in the 70s and 60s, you know, the richest people paid like 30% taxes. Now they pay little to nothing. So, I mean, it needs to be just reversed and back to the old ways. That's why things used to be able to cost. But anyway, yeah, that is what I saw. So, thanks so much. I'm out of time.
Table 4, we list a bunch of things that we felt was important as priorities, because we know the government likes to divide and conquer, so we just list some things as what was our number one community and human needs was housing, transportation, education, city service like parks or infrastructures, alternatives to no cuts. And this is where they starting to divide us right here. Healthcare used to mean everything, you know, physical, mental, your eyes and everything. So they trying to separate healthcare from mental health, which should be under the same thing, but because they like to divide and conquer, they going separate, and that's the way big groups are. You know, we know our priorities are different, and we think our priorities are the number one. But so we want to connect all these priorities and say they one big thing. So we got no regressive, building on our agreement and not to divide and conquer jobs. And for philosophy, we got unity, everyone in, nobody out. And this is what Sharif Abdullah, I'm studying, Right to Survive, is studying and trying to teach the dreamer emergence when there's, it's the community-owned things and not the banks. So if we're a big community and Lord want to buy some, we'll come together and give her the money and help her business prosper, and she had to hire the people that's in the community. And if it's not failing, we'll go to her and say, hey, maybe you need to go here to some more classes to make your business better. And we keep the money. It goes back into the community, not to the bank. So that's sort of like community ownership emerging. And then we got educate public to rally behind important policies such as taxing the rich. We need to do that. And then alternative idea is to curb and redirect our taxes from military spending and big development as in prison spending. And we need more community planning of city projects and city budget.
What's been presented up here. Some creative taxation. Imagine a rational taxation program that isn't simply purchased. Anyway, table number 3, we wanted to be conscious of wedges. There's, as we talked about earlier with city workers and education and transportation, each wanting, needing more, there will be tendency to have us work against each other, and we need to be conscious that those factors will come in and to defend ourselves against that. And we're the richest country in the world, and yet we're feeling this sense of poverty simply because we cannot share. And one of the reasons for that is our tremendous productivity. So because we're so successful, we're failing. So there's a proposal of a 20 or 21-hour work week that's presented by the New Economics Foundation. I recommend that you Google it to see that that's a way of sharing. Because if we all are so productive and have a 40-hour work week, the earth will go dry. So being conscious of wedges and also of advocating for responsible government. There are so many ways that government is purchased already. It's like that's why we're here, because something isn't working there. And we don't have a means of making it clear because, well, maybe the Oregonian isn't covering it. So it's up here somewhere. People-powered press. And as we mentioned earlier, that we have to put money behind a press, and then it will be courageous enough to cover what otherwise it's frankly foolish to cover. So we have to develop, and we have to get some institutions developing the ethic that you pay for a free press. A free press is not gratis. Okay, I'll be quick. In agreement with lots of other people, the big leaks out of our economy go to security spending and so-called security spending, but we're in other lands. And just to be aware that the banks have their teeth into us through foreclosures that are just going to cloud titles so people can't actually buy houses later. MERS, which is a database which is owned by the banks. Instead of paying recording fees to the county, the banks say they own everything. It's failing in court, and we need to be aware of that. And credit default swaps is the engine that will fund the continued foreclosures for the next 4 years until that's stopped. We can't necessarily stop that at the city level, but it attacks the city economy.
Thank you. These reports are all awesome. We're going to try to catch up a little bit now. Y'all focused on wanting to shift to a human needs budget and correct the flawed process that we have. To do that, we need to be armed with information. We have some people here who have done research on where the money is squirreled away and tied up and frozen, and those rocks that we've heard about in the last week that they've been looking under.